Dun, 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 like the intro to Century Fox or whatever it is.
Yes, perfect. All right, welcome back to AuddyHotties. This
We're
week we are continuing our first part two episode, which is about all the other things under the umbrella. So here we go.
Hotties.
Yeah, welcome to the AuddyHottie podcast.
Here we are. Also, I got a new sticker today. It's Disability
Ooh.
Pride. Happy Pride Month, by the
Happy
way.
Pride Month!
We love being gay.
So great. All right, guys, this week on AuddyHotties, I'm Bree.
I'm McKenna.
The same as we've always been.
Yes.
But this week is part two of what's under the umbrella. Last week we left off on sensory processing disorder,
Yes.
and this week we're picking back up with fetal alcohol syndrome. But before that, I had a couple of updates for some things that we talked about last time. So I looked up some answers to things.
Great.
Yeah,
Love to hear.
don't have super great answers because I'm not a diagnosing clinician, obviously.
Wait, what?
What?
That's part of your credentials.
But okay, so one of them was updating on testing and diagnosis for adults with dyscalculia.
That's right.
We had said that in somebody's experience that they'd been told that there was no diagnosis for adults. But when I researched it, it turns out that there's just a lot of psychologists who are not very well read, and a
Yeah.
lot of psychologists will tell you that there's no diagnosis.
Ah,
There is no official like objective test.
yeah,
Like the tests are all subjective,
sure.
but they can't diagnose you as an adult too. So that was good to know. If you're, psychologist or whoever tells you that that's not possible, then maybe do a little more digging. Which
But
doors
there's
this
not,
podcast.
yeah. Advocate for yourself.
hmm
Um, but there's not like a standardized assessment for dyscalculia.
Yeah, there's not a way to like
Yeah.
see it externally, basically. So
Interesting.
yeah.
Hmm.
And then another update was on tics versus stems versus echolalia.
Right.
So I did find one that kind of nicely summarized like stimming versus tics and where they come from. And then when I searched for echolalia, it was pulling up stuff that like I know it's not its own diagnosis, but it was pulling up stuff that made it kind of sound like it was its own diagnosis.
Interesting.
So I'd actually be interested to potentially do an episode on that. And other like
Maybe this
verbal
summer.
forms. Yeah, maybe this summer on our fully booked calendar.
Got a lot of
Yeah,
content
we got a
coming
lot
for
of
y'all.
episodes.
Um,
Cool.
so
Yeah.
echolalia versus
We've got stimming versus ticks. Yeah.
okay.
So we've got the biggest thing is they differ fundamentally in their nature and the underlying purposes. So stimming is primarily with individuals with autism and other neurodevelopmental conditions. It involves repetitive movements or actions that individuals perform to self-regulate sensory input or express emotions. So
Okay.
it's got a function.
Regulating
Yeah, it's got a
behavior.
regulating function. And they usually serve a specific function like sensory modulation or emotional expression. In contrast, tics are sudden involuntary movements or vocalizations associated with conditions like Tourette's. Unlike simming, tics are driven by internal urges or sensations and serve no practical purpose beyond relieving the discomfort associated with these urges. So they can experience varying levels of control over their behaviors and may find temporary relief from these sensations by engaging in the repetitive actions.
That is so interesting because when I think about my echolalia, particularly like movie quotes, it feels like an urge and that it's uncomfortable until I
Mhm.
like say it out loud or even until I like think of what the whole quote is and say it and deliver it.
Yeah, so that was actually
Interesting.
kind of what I was seeing was that the echolalia falls somewhere in between them and has some of its own like
Interesting.
diagnostic criteria to be echolalia. So yeah, I was very interested. Didn't have time to research it enough before this one, but
Oh, it's all good. I know about echolalia just from like Gestalt language processing. Like it's
mm,
a big characteristic of that. So it'd be
right.
interesting to learn more about it.
Yeah,
The
we'll
history
teach you
behind
more
it.
later.
A little way.
We'll teach you more later.
Yes, exactly.
And then the other update that we had was SPD, sensory processing disorder versus autism diagnosis, and kind of like where that overlap
Mhm.
lies. Um, and I found this interesting graphic that I'll post on our post for this one. But it's showing sensory processing disorder, ADHD, ASD, and GAD, generalized anxiety disorder, and
Oh,
how they overlap with one another. And they overlap all in the middle in the Venn diagram of four of them. They overlap with sensory anxiety. So that's kind of the combined feeling that everybody in that group has the same
yeah.
experience with.
Oh,
Yeah.
I'm so excited to look at that.
Yeah. The biggest overlap with SPD was actually ADHD because
Yeah.
it also includes some hyperactivity,
Yep.
and some hypersensitivity also.
That
So
makes sense.
yeah, it's a really
Cool.
interesting one.
Thank you for doing all that further research.
Yeah, happy to answer questions. All right, should we jump
Okay.
into today's?
Yes, I'm gonna prefix this. I'm like going on an hour of sleep, so I'm a
Yeah.
little sleepy.
Okay.
So I will participate as I am able.
Okay. Maybe it'll get you fired up like last time. You'll be ready to go.
Maybe.
All right, so this time we're starting with fetal alcohol syndrome, which is quoted as being 1 to 5% of the population, but it's hard to be exact because, again, this is something that, is looked on not positively, and so a lot of people aren't going to report it. And yeah, so we don't know as much as we could know. So fetal alcohol syndrome, I didn't know that it was considered a neurodiversity.
I didn't either.
But it does make sense because it is a change in the brain structure
Yeah.
and the way that the brain works. So fetal alcohol syndrome can mimic ADHD, autism, and Williams syndrome, which is another genetic disorder.
Yes.
So a lot of times it's missed for those reasons also, that
Yeah.
some people may be diagnosed with autism but actually have underlying fetal alcohol that we didn't know about,
Got
kind
it.
of thing. And there's a bunch of different types of FAS. So FAS itself, fetal alcohol syndrome, is the most severe condition on the scale. There's
Hmm.
actually other conditions within the same category of diagnosis that are not as severe. So you can have partial fetal alcohol syndrome, PFAS, and they'll have some of the characteristics of FAS, like changes to facial features, but don't have all the symptoms. Then there's alcohol-related neurodevelopmental disorder, ARAND, and people with this disorder experience some or all of the following: impulsiveness, inattentiveness, and challenges with judgment and school performance. Then alcohol-related birth defects, which are more just physical birth defects. So changes to the heart, eyes, skeletal system, ears, and kidneys. And then the last one of those is neurobehavioral disorder associated with prenatal alcohol exposure. That was really long, but I think it's on like the lowest end. So it's like you've got some kind of behaviors that we think are associated with this, but are not like,
Fascinating.
yeah,
Yeah.
not such a big thing.
Huh.
And then that one was that they were exposed to a small amount of alcohol and may have difficulty with things like daily tasks, like bathing, and can struggle in social settings because of more significant behavior issues like tantrums.
So it does really sound like there's a lot of crossover with autism and
Yeah.
ADHD.
And you can see how, like in a child, if they're presenting with just tantrums or some difficulty with processing things and
Right.
learning, how difficult it would be to put them into the correct categories.
Sure. And just like you were saying, because it's so taboo, you don't know if like people are being honest about like
Yeah.
toxin exposure, but I don't know what the other, it's not toxin, substance abuse.
Substance abuse. Yeah. Substance exposure in utero. Which interestingly, it didn't talk at all about discoordination, but what I see in kiddos that I treat that have some exposure either to drugs or alcohol in utero is more coordination difficulties. So a lot
Yeah,
of like
see that
brainstem
too.
function difficulty
Yeah.
and like ataxia, difficulty with gait and loss of balance, that kind of thing.
That's how it was always presented to me in grad school too. Like
Mhm.
I didn't know about the neurodiverse characteristics that matched up to like autism and ADHD. So it's really fascinating. Like I wonder how many kids are misdiagnosed.
Yeah.
Um,
So that's all I had on that one. But then we're going to epilepsy. So it's 1.1% of the adult population. but it most commonly starts with a chronic brain disease.
Yeah.
It's actually debated whether it is a neurodiversity or not, because it can develop at any age. But it's most common with young children in the first year of life, and then people over 55 because they've had like strokes, brain tumors, Alzheimer's, or traumatic brain
Mhm.
injuries. It can also be caused by infections, autoimmune disorders, genetics, metabolic problems, and structural problems with the
Mhm.
brain. And then some people will have an epilepsy syndrome, which is characterized by a certain type of seizures and the location that they're happening in. But there are a lot of different ones. Like there was 27 types according to the Epilepsy
Wow.
Foundation.
That's a lot.
Yeah, so I'm not going through all of those
Yeah.
today.
You
I
sure
will
you don't
post
want
the link.
to?
But I did want to share some seizure first aid for people that are not familiar with
Brilliant.
it. Yeah, I'll also post
Use
this.
our platform for the good.
I've actually been present when people have had epileptic seizures, like
Yeah.
probably like 5 or 6 times in my
Wow.
life. So one was in my college classroom.
Wow.
So yeah, even younger people should get educated on
Oh,
how
yeah.
to help people.
I think it's so important.
Yeah. So this is just a basic seizure first aid guide. So the first thing is staying with the person until they're awake and alert after the seizure. It's important to time it if you can, remain calm for them to help them through it, and then also check for a medical ID that may give you a clue as to why they're having a seizure. But timing it is really important for when EMS arrives because they're going to ask how long was the seizure to know if it was grand mal or if it was a more minor thing, and to know if it fit like with the same pattern that that person has had in the past.
Got it.
Keeping the person safe, so moving them away from harm. Then three, turning them onto their side if they're not awake and aware. You want to keep the airway clear and loosen any tight clothes that they have around their neck, like ties or shirts that are tighter.
Hmm.
And then if you can, put something small and soft under their head, like a pillow, to protect them from the floor. You should call 911 if the seizure lasts longer than 5 minutes, the person does not return to their usual state afterwards, they're injured, pregnant, or sick, there's repeated seizures in a row, it's the first time that that person's had a seizure, difficulty with breathing, or the seizure occurs in the water. So it sounds like some people, I'm sure if people have a seizure disorder that they report to their friends or classmates or whatever,
Yeah.
I'm sure that they've given them instructions of like, if I have a seizure, do this stuff, but don't call 911.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sure they probably instructed them that way.
Makes sense.
And the things that you should not do is do not restrain them in any way. It used to be thought that you should kind of like hug them or contain them, but really shouldn't contain. You're just trying to keep safe so that they're not hitting body parts on things.
Yeah.
And then don't put any objects in their mouth.
Yeah, that's a huge one.
Yeah.
I know it.
Which to me at first I was like, why would you put anything in someone else's mouth? And then I had to like think it through, like what people were thinking when they're.
Yeah, 'cause they thought that your tongue would be obstruct. Well, they thought that your tongue would obstruct your airway, so keeping it out with
Mhm.
a tongue depressor. But
Or I've seen too, like where they put something for them to like bite down on,
oh,
and that's
interesting.
yeah, and that's also not
Huh.
not recommended.
Yeah.
And then if they have any rescue medicines, you can ask them afterwards, or that may be on their bracelet as well.
Yeah.
So, do you know? I don't know where all medical alert things. I think it's usually a necklace or a bracelet.
Usually a necklace or a bracelet. I do know that there is a way to set it up on your phone
Mm.
too, where I wonder if people would have their phone on them and like there's a little emergency icon that pops up and you
Mm.
you don't have to like unlock their phone or anything, like that information will pop up.
Yeah.
Probably also a good idea to check their wallet and see if
Mm.
there's any like
Card
cash. No, I'm
or
just kidding.
didn't even see McKenna going there. I'm so trusting. I should probably just check their wallet for altruistic purposes.
I don't know. To see if there's a card. Oh, that's a good
Really
one.
trouble.
I am trouble. Just had an hour of sleep.
hmm So yeah, so if you have any other questions about epilepsy, there's a lot of information, um, and you can educate yourself further if you want to go to their sites that I'll share when we post the post.
Perfect.
Yeah. Next, we've got Down syndrome. which is 1 in 700 children. I could not find a percentage to save my life, and I wasn't about to do a bunch of math to find out.
Yeah.
So,
Good on you.
yeah, thanks. So I also didn't know that Down syndrome was included in the neurodiversity category, which
Interesting.
like a lot of these things I'm like, wow, I feel so stupid for not knowing that. And then I go,
No.
wait a minute, no, like this is the point of educating on this because I want to learn
I love
and
that.
therefore everyone else gets to learn.
Totally. You got to be gentle with yourself.
Yeah. So in children, Down syndrome is the most common chromosomal condition, and it's having an extra chromosome 21. So it's also called trisomy 21. So we're only supposed to have two. So then you get the extra, the third one, and that gives you trisomy.
I didn't
Um,
know that actually.
oh, there you go,
Thank
trisomy
you.
21. There's a lot of other Down syndrome adjacent, like you can have mosaic Down
Hmm.
syndrome, where it's a partial copy, or I was listening to a creator that was talking about hers that she didn't know she had Down syndrome until she had
Yeah.
kids, and then
Yeah.
they had stronger features of Down syndrome, so they tested the kiddos. And she found out she had mosaic, where half of her cells ish have the third, and others don't.
Interesting.
So yeah, there's some different types in there. The biggest thing that people know about Down syndrome is obviously like some of the common physical traits. So having kind of the upward slant to the eyes, smaller stature, but then they can also have low muscle tone, which some
Hmm.
people don't know. So they're more likely to have some injuries with the neck or more prone to hypermobility, that kind of thing.
You also can have a lot of cardiac issues.
Yes, yeah.
A lot.
Yeah, we were just talking about a treatment that you can help with low tone sometimes that's like using like a compressive suit.
Awesome.
But then we were talking about you have to watch for any kiddos that have cardiac conditions
Yeah.
also because you're changing their blood pressure by
Yeah.
changing the compression around their body.
Right.
So, yeah, got to keep an eye on that. And then life expectancy is improving a lot. In
Good.
1983, the life expectancy for people with Down syndrome was 25 years.
Yeah. I remember being a uh younger kid, and one of my brother's friends had a brother with Down syndrome, and my mom telling me like he's probably not going to live past 35, and it like
Mm,
being so jarring to hear that and just not really understanding why or how.
yeah.
But
Yeah, now
that's
we are up
surprising.
to 60 years old is the
Good.
life expectancy. So
Awesome.
nearing a normal lifespan with our progress and
Science is so cool.
science, yeah. And early diagnosis of things. I mean, especially those cardiac conditions, I'm sure there was a lot of things because of that, but we catch babies with cardiac things very early now.
Yeah, that's so true.
Yeah. And then all people with Down syndrome experience some cognitive delays, but
Mhm.
it usually can be from like mild to moderate.
Mhm.
And then there's a lot of overlap between other neurodiversities and Down syndrome with sensory
Mhm.
issues, developmental delays, language and expressive communication delays.
Mhm.
And then 16 to 18% of people with Down syndrome may also have autism.
Yeah.
So I actually don't know that I know anyone who's been diagnosed with both,
Mm.
which is interesting to me because that makes sense to me that you could have both. Mm.
Um, yeah, I would say mine is around that range, like 2 out of 10 of students that I've had with Down syndrome
Hmm.
also have autism.
Okay.
Yeah,
And your population is a little bit older, so that
it's true. Well, that's counting too, like students that I've had in my practicums.
mm. Okay, yeah.
So kind of overall, I think I've seen around 8 or 10
Mm.
um kids with Down syndrome.
And then they also have differences in social skills, but people with Down syndrome often have better social communication skills and be more socially engaged than a lot of other people on the neurodiversities. Yeah, they've got some super
Nice.
cool strengths. Mm,
Yeah, it's interesting too. One of the things that we work on in speech that's not, it's physical, it's not part of neurodiversity, but sometimes their tongues can be bigger.
mm,
So working with like articulation and uh I think that the low tone contributes to that as well.
yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
I wonder, because like now that I'm thinking about it, when learning about all of these things, it really was all of the physical
Hmm.
disability of it. And now I'm like, hmm, we just don't know a lot about our invisibilities.
Yeah.
But like it's astounding, even just, the amount of research that's coming out now versus,
Yeah.
20, 30 years ago, I'm sure is just so much more. And like knowing that there is that internal component, I wonder what that's going to do for lifespan and quality of life. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Hmm.
it's fascinating.
Well, and we can never negate the high rates of unaliving
Yeah,
also among all people with disabilities of some degree. So knowing that
so true.
internal world, like I said, maybe knowing the internal world better will help us get where there's less, rates of unaliving that also brings down our life expectancy.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Such a great point and way of putting it. Wow.
Okay, so that's all I have on Down syndrome. There's a lot of features to Down syndrome and a lot of research out there.
Yeah.
And it's really cool to get involved with the different organizations and stuff for them. So if you want more information, there's a lot out there.
Yeah.
Moving on, I got bipolar disorder.
Hmm.
So 2.6% of the population. And the average onset is around 25 years old.
Weird.
Yeah, I definitely thought that this was something that you would have like known that you had in high school or something or like
Yeah.
super early, but yeah, 25 and can be as late as 40 or 50 years old.
Whoa.
Yeah. That makes me wonder like how many women are like thought to be going through premenopause but may actually
Yeah.
be like developing bipolar or
Yeah.
like starting to show symptoms of bipolar.
Totally.
Yeah, I have no idea.
Yeah, there needs to be way more education on how it presents, what it is,
Mhm.
all of that stuff.
Yeah, so bipolar disorder definition, sometimes it's called manic depression. It is a mental illness characterized by extreme shifts in mood, energy, and activity levels. They can range from intense periods of mania, which is the extreme high, to periods of deep depression or extreme lows. And people can also have mixed episodes, which is a combination of manic and depressive symptoms, which leads to more like irritability, anxiety, agitation, that kind of thing. And then there was another one that I'd never heard of before, which is hypomanic episodes, which is similar to manic episodes, but less severe and less disruptive to daily life. And then there's a few different kinds of bipolar. So there's bipolar 1, which people with bipolar 1 have experienced one or more episodes of mania. And most people with bipolar 1 will have episodes of both mania and depression, but an episode of depression isn't necessary for a diagnosis. Usually the episodes last at least 2 weeks. To be diagnosed with one, your manic episodes must last at least 7 days or be so severe that you need hospitalization. And then they can also experience those mixed states.
Yeah.
But then people with bipolar 2, they experience depressive episodes and hypomanic episodes, but they never experience a full manic episode. That's more characteristic of the bipolar 1. So while hypomania is less impairing than mania, bipolar 2 disorder is often more debilitating due to the chronic depression being more common.
Yeah.
And then the last one listed under those is cyclothymic disorder or cyclothymia. And these people generally have chronically unstable mood states. So they experience hypomania and mild depression for at least 2 years. And then they may have brief periods of normal mood, euthymia. They may have brief periods of normal moods, but these periods last fewer than 8 weeks. So you may feel like you're like feeling normal, but then it's short-lived and back into some up and downs.
Fascinating.
Yeah. And then apparently there's other unspecified bipolar related disorders. So you could have
Always.
something adjacent to.
There's not enough research
Yeah.
or clarity.
Yeah. So some things that cause bipolar disorder, we don't really know the exact cause yet, but they do believe that there's a strong genetic component.
Yeah.
And then it's also considered one of the most heritable psychiatric conditions. So more than two-thirds of people with bipolar have at least one close biological relative with the condition.
Okay.
However, just because you have a biological relative doesn't mean that you'll develop it.
Right.
Some other factors that they think might contribute to it would be changes in your brain. Um, so subtle differences in the size or activation of some of the brain structures, but brain scans can't diagnose it. And then environmental factors like trauma and stress, like
Yeah.
a deeply stressful event, like the death of a loved one, a serious illness,
That changes your brain.
yeah, divorce or
Yeah.
financial problems can trigger a manic or depressive episode.
Yeah.
And then people with bipolar are also more likely to have anxiety, ADHD, PTSD, and substance use disorders. So
Mm.
there's some more of that overlap.
Yeah, honestly, when I was getting diagnosed with autism, ADHD, I knew that there was something going on, and I was like, is it bipolar? Because I had a lot of anxiety and a lot of depressive episodes. And I was like, is this mania? Is this like a pattern that I'm seeing? And after being diagnosed with ADHD and learning some of the tools to work with it and learning, like, taking care of my sensory system, working with my social habits or social boundaries, I should say, social habits.
Mm.
Um, I haven't experienced depression or anxiety pretty much since last summer. It's
Wow.
pretty incredible, like without being medicated or anything. So I think that just goes to show, I think bipolar is one that gets misdiagnosed all the time
Mhm.
for people with ADHD or even like anxiety and depression.
Yeah.
Like you're diagnosed with anxiety and depression before you're diagnosed with autism or ADHD. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of circulating information. And again, it is hard to parse through because there are so many overlays. But I
Mhm.
think the important thing is like what will help you and what is the root of it all. And
Yeah.
if it is bipolar and it is like that brain chemistry, probably medication will help. If it is autism or ADHD, probably just learning more about your brain and how it connects to your body and that sort of
Maybe changing
experience.
patterns in your life and that kind of thing.
Exactly, exactly. So, yeah,
Yeah. That's
interesting.
definitely one that I've heard frequently
Hmm.
diagnosed instead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think
Right.
there is such a stigma around it too, which is
Yeah, definitely.
wild. Mm.
Oh, that was the other thing I was going to say to that too is like the hyper focus can also feel like mania. Because
Yes,
if you're in hyper
that's the
focus and like
thing.
ADHD cleaning
Yes.
mode or whatever, you can feel
Yeah,
like you are like way high and then
absolutely.
crash. Like, yeah.
Yes, that is a huge part of it.
Yeah. Mhm.
So many crossovers.
Okay. So the next one I wanted to go through is borderline personality disorder. So this one is 1.4% of the population, so a little bit less from bipolar. But first, I wanted to cover the difference between borderline and bipolar disorder because honestly, I didn't really know how to separate the two in my head before this.
They sound very similar too. I don't
Yeah,
know.
doesn't help.
Yeah.
So the difference is they have similar symptoms and are often confused for each other, but they're distinct conditions. So BPD involves a long-standing pattern of abrupt, moment-to-moment swings in mood, behavior, and self-image that are often triggered by conflicts in interactions with other people. Non-suicidal self-injury is also common in BPD, but not in bipolar disorder. And then bipolar is different from BPD because it involves distinct, longer-lasting episodes of mania and depression. And several things can trigger those episodes, like sleep changes, stress, medications, substance use, etc. So that's interesting. BPD is mostly focused around conflicts, interactions with other people. So that kind of covers what BPD is, but it's basically summarized as being a mental health condition marked by extreme mood fluctuations, instability in interpersonal relationships, and impulsivity. People with BPD have an intense fear of abandonment and have trouble regulating their emotions, especially anger. And they also tend to show impulsive and dangerous behaviors like reckless driving, threatening self-harm, and other behaviors that make it difficult for them to maintain relationships. Borderline personality disorder is one of a group of conditions called cluster B personality disorders, which involves dramatic and erratic behaviors. And personality disorders are chronic, long-term dysfunctional behavior patterns that are inflexible, prevalent, and lead to social issues and distress. Most people that live with BPD don't know that they have it and may not realize that there's a healthier way to behave and relate to others. Some things that cause BPD is it usually begins in teenage years and then it's usually diagnosed after 18. And it can be caused by childhood abuse and trauma, which is like up to 70% of BPD. And then maternal separation, poor maternal attachment, inappropriate family boundaries, and parental substance use disorders are also associated with it. And then it can also be genetic. So if you have a family history, you're more likely, but not guaranteed to have it.
Mhm.
And there's also brain changes. So they may also have changes in their brain in the areas that control emotion and behavior, not communicating properly.
Mhm.
So that's pretty much all I had on borderline personality disorder.
Yeah. That one also, I feel like, is not, there's a lot of taboo and stigma
Mhm.
around, especially with like throwing narcissism kind of in there too. I feel
Right.
like
Big
there,
trigger word right now.
well, that's exactly what I was going to say. I think we talked about this in the original episode with Gabby, just talking about how like there are trigger words on social media. And I feel like
Mhm.
narcissism is one, BPD is one, and people are so, because they're so taboo, they're afraid to either like look at themselves and their behaviors or seek help for them or like pin it on something else that is maybe less taboo. But like again, I think it's just figuring out like what is actually going on with your brain and your body. And I
Hmm.
mean, maybe there is like, you know, lack of interoception skills with that as well, of not really understanding like what's going on. But
Yeah.
I
There's,
feel like the more time we spend destigmatizing these conditions and putting more effort
yeah.
into defining them and
Well, I hope like some of the takeaway from this is how much we can relate to one another in ways. Like even though these
yes.
conditions are so different and distinct and come from different places, we
Yeah,
may have a lot of overlapping struggles with other people. And the really
absolutely.
sad thing with BPD is it sounds like most of it is not caused by anyone that person's fault. Like
No,
it's not a choice in behavior.
it's not.
Similarly to it's not our choice in behavior if we are overstimulated or
Right.
not socializing well or whatever. Like same thing. Like this was caused by something else.
That's such a
And
great way of putting it.
yeah.
And it, I know that there have been a couple of people in my life that have either a sibling or a close friend with BPD, like undiagnosed, but it's pretty clear that that's what's going on, and they're super hard to interact with and find any sort of like um I don't know. It's just I think it's hard for them. It's not my
Mhm.
experience, so I guess I can't talk about it, but
Yeah.
it is
It's interesting
interesting.
that a lot of people live with it without knowing that it is like I can't imagine like feeling I guess I can because I was undiagnosed for so long, but just feeling like
Imagine.
just like feeling like out of control or like out of knowing why you're doing something that you're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm.
It's it's an experience that is so, I mean, I don't say the word crazy lightly, like, because, that's a problem to use that word lightly, but like, you kind of feel like you're crazy
Hmm.
before having answers. And I know for me, I also threw in BPD last year when I was kind of trying to figure out what the fuck was going on because I was just like, what is happening?
Yeah.
Um, and again, it's not that one is worse or better. It's just like being honest with like what was happening in my brain and in my body. And thank God I did.
Yeah.
Like, because it's a tough fight. And it's like you're kind of at war with yourself. And
Yeah. My first diagnosis, one of the things, my first testing, the one that didn't diagnose me, one of the things that he did say was that I showed a lot of impulsivity.
hmm,
Um, like that makes you feel crazy too, because you're like, okay, so I'm just impulsive with no reason.
yeah,
There's no reason for my impulsivity. I'm just out here
right.
like doing things to do things.
It's just spontaneous.
Spontaneously
You're
doing
just an
things.
Aries.
Yeah. So I can imagine it would be hard not knowing why you're making the choices that you're making. It'd be interesting to know
Yeah,
like
and just
how
feel
people
validated too.
yeah.
And also, I think validated in that there's nothing wrong with you. There's
Yeah.
nothing wrong with these neurodivergences. It's just what happened and what is, and we go from here.
Yeah. And there's figure out what the difference in your brain is and
Yeah,
manage how that works best for you.
try to.
Yeah.
There are hard days for sure,
Yeah.
but a lot less of them.
Yeah.
So,
Speaking of something that's hard to manage,
oh
but
God.
manageable if you know about it, as schizophrenia is the next one on there.
Ah,
Yeah. So we've got this one is only 0.3 to 0.7% of the population, so even lower frequency,
yeah.
which somehow I feel like I've heard like 1,000 things more. probably wrong. It's probably incorrectly. But I feel like I've heard so much more about schizophrenia in media and stuff than bipolar and BPD, like fetal alcohol, like a lot of those other ones. But I'm wondering how much
I
of it is
agree.
stereotypical.
And like
Mm,
patriarchal
mm,
and like gendered and
yeah.
all the fun, delicious things of our society.
So schizophrenia, we don't really know why it happens, but genetics is a possibility.
Mhm.
Brain chemistry and then the environment can also be some of it. So a lot of it is changes in naturally occurring brain chemicals, including your neurotransmitters,
Mhm.
specifically dopamine and glutamate.
Mhm.
That part may play a part in schizophrenia. And then this is one that does show on imaging studies. So neuroimaging can show changes in the brain structure and central nervous systems of people with schizophrenia.
Ugh. It's the same, similar onset to bipolar, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Age-wise, you mean?
I think it's around 25, 26, if
So
I'm
if I
not
have that right.
mistaken.
Yeah. So the average age of onset for schizophrenia depends on gender. For men, it's typically seen late teens to early 20s, and women, it's late 20s to early 30s.
Wow.
So some symptoms of schizophrenia can involve a range of problems in how people think, feel, and behave. They can include delusions, which is when people believe in things that aren't real or true. For example, they could think that they're being harmed or harassed when they are not. And they could also think that they're the target for certain gestures or comments when they aren't. They may think that they're very famous or have great ability, or they could feel that a major disaster is about to occur when it's not. Most people with schizophrenia have delusions. Then there's hallucinations, which usually involve seeing or hearing things that other people don't observe. So delusions is the believing, hallucinations is the seeing and hearing. Um, for people with schizophrenia, these things seem truly like real, and the hallucinations can occur with any of the senses, but hearing voices is the most common one. Then they also have disorganized speech and thinking, which are kind of hand in hand because the disorganized speech is part of what causes the disorganized thinking. But it can be hard for people with schizophrenia to talk with other people, and the answers that people with schizophrenia give to questions may not be related to what's being asked of them, or the questions may not be answered fully. And rarely, speech may include putting together unrelated words in a way that can't be understood. Sometimes this is called word salad. And then there's also motor symptoms too, so disorganized or unusual motor behavior. So this can show in several ways from things like childlike silliness to being agitated for no reason. But the behavior isn't really focused on a goal, so it's hard to do tasks. And people with schizophrenia may not want to follow instructions, and may move in ways that are not typical or not appropriate to the social setting. And they also may not move much or respond at all. This one is one of the ones that had listed some strengths, though, which is fun.
We
So,
love strengths here.
yes. So people with schizophrenia oftentimes are extremely creative and have high artistic expression, and often manifested through like unique perspectives, imagery that's really vivid, or unconventional thinking, some enhanced intuition and insight. So sometimes their delusions are incorrect, but other times they have more insight on the situation because they're paying so much attention to what's happening around them. But it also can be related to a disruption in the brain's filtering mechanisms. So it allows for like a wider range of information to be processed, which kind of sounds the same as like our auditory sensitivities because there's so much sound coming in or visuals coming in, and our brain isn't filtering them down to make them um, more clear for our brains. Increased empathy and compassion. Some people with schizophrenia can have increased attunement to the experiences and the emotions of the people around them. And then some people can lead really profound spiritual or religious lives.
Interesting. That's
Yeah.
so cool.
Okay, we're on to our last one that we're actually covering in depth, which is intellectual disability. So this I also didn't realize was a distinct diagnosis by itself. Like I kind of just assumed
Mhm.
it was a piece of other things,
Yeah, I
which I
thought it
think
was
it
like a
can be.
generalized thing, and then you get
Yeah.
into more specifics, but interesting.
Yeah. And this one is 1 to 3% of the population. So we're going back up in frequency here. And it's a condition characterized by significant limitations in intellectual functioning and adaptive behaviors that originates before the age of 22. So some symptoms can be lumped under the intelligence umbrella, which is more of just a term for your ability to understand and interact with the world around you. Which
Yeah.
explains why we get diagnosed with similar things. So you could have some of the following, like delayed or slow learning of any kind, such as in school or real life experiences, slower reading speed, difficulty with reasoning and logic, problems with judgment or critical thinking, trouble using problem solving and planning abilities, and distractibility and difficulty focusing. You can see how there would be a lot of overlap there with ADHD.
Yeah.
And then adaptive behaviors, which revolve more around like abilities and learned skills that you need to live and support yourself.
Yeah.
So slower learning of things like toilet training and self-care activities, bathing, dressing, etc. Slower social development, little or no fear or apprehension of new people, so that lack of stranger danger.
Huge.
Um, Needing help from parental figures or other caregivers. Difficulty learning how to do chores or other common tasks. And trouble understanding concepts like time management or money, healthcare appointments, medications, and then also social boundaries and understandings of social interactions. So lots of overlap there.
Yeah.
So a lot of different causes of things that can relate to this, which makes sense because it is a little bit more of a broad um, diagnosis. But it could be genetics or inherited. Examples of some of the diagnoses that come along with intellectual disability. So you can have like Down syndrome, Fragile X, or Prader-Willi syndrome. So these are all genetic
Mm.
conditions. And then infections. So you can get the intellectual delay from some infections like toxoplasmosis and rubella. Things like cerebral palsy, teratogens, which are substances that can disrupt fetal development. Oh, okay. So that's like alcohol, tobacco, medications, radiation exposure, and more.
Mm.
Some medical conditions, if the mother has them while pregnant, it can cause it, like hypothyroidism. And then some of the things that can happen during birth, which would be like lack of oxygen, prematurity, a brain injury during birth, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then they can also happen in early childhood. There's a couple different levels. There's mild, moderate, severe, and profound. They rank them kind of as like what age your mental age gets to. So mild is between the ages of 9 and 12, and all the way up to profound, which is people that have an average mental age of 3 years or below. So something that I was reading under that one is that this is kind of the umbrella where the R word kind of came from. So p judging people based on their abilities, especially intellectually. So I wanted to go through a little trigger warning that the R word is used in this pamphlet thing that I'm going to read.
It is,
Yes, it's an organization that's specifically trying to get rid of the R word.
but they use it.
Yeah, it'll say kind of why. So,
Okay, I'm gonna brace myself.
yeah, so brace yourselves. If you want to skip through it, you're welcome to. But they are talking about why we're trying to get rid of it and the importance of it. And we kind of need to know the history in order to know why we don't use it
Yeah,
anymore,
that's
too.
important
Yeah.
information.
So this group is called Arc Morris. Um, their whole goal is working on terminology. But basically, the use of the word retard dates as far back as 1426. It stems from the Latin verb retardere, meaning to hinder or make slow.
Yep.
And then the English adopted the word and used it as a similar meaning, slow and delayed. The word to decelerate would become a more common term than to retard. So basically, they replaced slowing and delaying with decelerate. Um, in modern use, retard is a pejorative term because it is now considered offensive. The word is commonly referred to by the euphemisms R word and R slur. It was previously used as a medical term. So the verb to retard means to delay or hold back. And so retard became known as a medical term in the 19th and 20th centuries to describe children with intellectual disabilities or retarded mental development. Up until about the 1960s, the terms moron, idiot, Cretin, and imbecile were all genuine, non-offensive terms to refer to people with intellectual disabilities and low intelligence.
Yep.
So all these words started out as being non-offensive terms. They're
Yeah.
just things that people used. These words were discontinued in that form when concerns arose that they had developed negative meanings, um, which was then those words, moron, idiot, etc., were replaced by retard and retarded because that was now the not a negative connotation. Does that make sense? Like they were replacing the words that were now negative
Mhm.
with a word that was not negative.
Yeah, it's a
Mhm.
cycle. It's totally a cycle of language.
Exactly. That's
Yeah.
exactly how to say it.
Yeah.
After that, the terms handicapped and disabled replaced retard and retarded,
Yeah.
and disabled is now considered more polite than handicapped in the United States.
Yeah.
Much like today's widely socially accepted terms idiot and moron, which are also defined as some sort of mental disability, when the term retard is being used in its pejorative form, it is usually not being directed at people with mental disabilities. Instead, people use the term when teasing their friends or as a general insult. As of 2010, despite not typically being used in an official context, mental retardation was still written in many of US states' laws and documents.
Oh, I know.
Till 2010.
Yeah. I was in a ton of my like research for
Mm,
a grad school
yeah.
articles that I had to read.
And then President Obama replaced the term with intellectual disability
Hmm.
with the approval of Rosa's law, which would require those laws and documents to phase out terms with the intellectual disability term. The Rosa's Law was named after Rosa Marcelino, a 9-year-old girl with Down syndrome. She worked with her parents to have the words mentally retarded officially removed from Health and Education Code in Maryland, her home state. With this new law, those terms no longer existed in federal health or education and labor policy, and the rights of individuals with disabilities would remain the same. The goal of this word removal was to remove language that may be considered hurtful from communities.
Yeah.
This program says we're doing everything in our power to make sure this language is adopted more broadly and strongly believe that the only R word that should be used when referring to people with intellectual and developmental disabilities is respect.
Oh, go off.
Wait, we need to snap closer to the mic. I can't snap loud.
I learned that it's actually the sound of your middle finger hitting your thumb. That's the sound. It's
Makes
like,
sense.
it's, anyway, the more you know.
So I'm going to share on our posts that information and then generally just some educational stuff. But the biggest thing is don't let your friends fucking say the R word. Like, you
Yeah.
know people who are using it in slang or in making fun of their friends or whatever, like that was talking about. That's not okay. Like, it's still hurtful to people
Yeah.
to even just hear the word out and about.
It
Like,
is really hurtful. And
mm,
I mean, it's a really good point to bring up because there are so many problems with language that people use. I mean, you said a few examples of idiot and moron, but I mean, dumb
yeah.
is not cool to use. Um, I find that just naming what is going on in the name of dignity and respect for the individual is huge. I have people say people that experience autism at my
Mm,
work, and it bugs the shit out of me.
yeah.
And I've like had conversations with them before, and it's just their pattern, and they're not autistic. So it's not like they really should have a say in it. But I mean, they've also worked in special education for 30 years. So it's just language moves slowly. I think we've seen it in a
Yeah.
few different areas, but
And people have a hard time accepting changes in language.
agreed.
Like you said, especially people who have been around a little longer. I definitely have experienced that with working with elderly patients, is that a lot of them are not meaning to use words like that in a way that's hurtful, but they
Yeah.
also won't accept that that's not what it means anymore.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
intent versus impact and
And they'll use the phrases of like,
yeah.
well, that's just not what I mean by it, or like that's just,
Yeah.
back in my day,
Yeah.
that's
Tale as
didn't
old
mean
as
anything.
time.
Yeah.
I
Um,
know.
so yeah, so there's a campaign also called Spread the Word, and that's also working to end the R word use. And they have a day, the Spread the Word Day, which we had
Let's
missed
celebrate.
this year.
God damn it.
It's March 4th. So we got, next year we can celebrate Spread the Word Day.
Perfect. Let's mark our calendars.
Yeah. So the last set of conditions that's included within neurodiversities is actually anxiety and depression. So I'm not going to go into them because there are many complex things, and most of us know the basics of what we need to know about them. But I did want to tell the rates of them because the rates are really high. Um, so anxiety is a rate of about 18% of the population, and depression is about 21%, which if you switch it from that percent into the number of people with it, that's about 1 in 5 people.
Yeah, it's a
So
lot.
the classic, like if you're sitting around the table, with 8 of your friends, at least one or two of them probably has depression. Um, Same with anxiety, and then also being gay. There's always going to be one in the room.
They're probably all three.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's one of those things again, like we talked about earlier, that I think depression and anxiety can hold a lot of space for other conditions going on. And I just think that again, it's like this rhetoric, but there just needs to be more information and more clarity about what we're working with so that we can adequately help people. I'm positive if I wasn't diagnosed with ADHD, I would be like on medication for depression and anxiety forever
Yeah.
because it wasn't helping what was going on, you
Mhm.
know?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And that, like when you're talking about figuring out whether you also had bipolar or BPD
mhm,
or something like that, um, I struggled with that a lot too because was like, I now know that I have ADHD.
right.
But I haven't been able to manage fully, even with knowing all my symptoms and being able to adjust for things. I think
Yeah.
that I'm just not made for the human world and working and such. But
Yes.
I also think that I have some genetic base of just straight depression.
Hmm.
Because like almost everyone in my extended family, especially on my dad's
Yeah.
side, was. And so there's that of trying to figure out like, is it, one of these other things? Is it just the depression component? Yeah.
Totally. That
Mhm.
makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And that can exist too of having ADHD and depression
Right.
too.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
that comorbidity.
Yeah.
But anyway,
Exactly. Who knew?
yeah, right. You can be all the things, actually. You
Whoa.
could be the most neurodiverse brain out there. Well, I'm so glad we did those two episodes because I feel like I learned so much.
Oh, good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and also it's so much reflection on the ableism of invisible disabilities, the patterning of language.
And I think like
Oh,
empathy
you
of
it.
just having the awareness of how much overlap and how many similar struggles you can have with someone else that
Yeah,
feels like their diagnosis is not even related to yours, but they
yeah,
can be.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Like,
Because it's not an
absolutely.
inclusive list. I mean, we
No,
read the definition at the beginning that,
yeah,
neurodiversity is a difference in the way that your brain works
yeah,
and processes information, and that could include even more things. So,
absolutely.
yeah.
Cool.
All right. If you guys have anything else that you want to learn about that you find out is under the umbrella, let us know.
Ask
I'm
us a
happy.
question, leave us a comment.
I'm happy to do more research on whatever.
I am not, so no, I'm just kidding. Just kidding.
Anyway, thanks for joining us for a little bit more serious set of episodes for learning instead of just sitting around
We
shooting the
always make
shit.
it fun though.
Shooting the shit.
He's shooting the shit. We're always finding joy, Bree.
Yeah. Speaking of,
Find your joy.
be unapologetically you this week.
Take care of yourself.
Thanks, Hotties.
Thanks for joining us this week. You can find us on Spotify, YouTube, and Apple Music.
Please like, subscribe, and leave us a review. We could use some of those. If you want to get pictures that go along with our episodes and follow along, join us on Instagram and TikTok.
Thanks,
Thanks, Hotties.
hotties. Bloopity bloop bloop.
Bloopers! And serve no practical purpose beyond relieving the discomfort associated with those urges. Hold on.
Oh no, do you want some?
Got my water.
Um, Interesting.
I don't know why I'm dying.
Oh, it's
Okay.
okay. It's life.
Try
We're
that
on our
again.
way to dying.
Dark. I've never heard that before.
Me neither.
It makes sense. U is the like, I don't know, mid-range starter prefix,
Oh, it
whatever.
is.
Yeah. So that makes sense. So that would be euthymia, because the thymia is the
Thalamus.
I think in this one it's more like thymic. No, I don't know. It's I don't know, skip that.